In Racing Through Time, we look at the great drivers, the cars, the races, and the circuits that made motorsport history. Ferrari is probably the most famous name in racing, but as a mark, it only appeared in the 1940s. Enzo Ferrari had a long career in motor racing before he set up his own company. Enzo Ferrari's history goes back to his association with Alfa Romeo when he ran their racing team in the 1930s. Post-war, the ambitious Enzo wanted to create his own racing cars, and he financed this by building expensive sports cars. Success in both areas led to the growth of the company that has been an integral part of racing for over 50 years. Ferrari remains the crowd favourite, and their appeal is worldwide. Ferrari has won more Formula One races and had more world champions than any other team. They are also the only team that has competed in each year since the World Championship started in 1950. On Racing Through Time, we look at famous moments from Ferrari's racing history. On February the 18th, 1998, celebrations began to mark the centenary of Enzo Ferrari's birth. He was born on the outskirts of the northern Italian town of Modena. 100 years later, a statue commemorating his career and life in racing was unveiled. Enzo Ferrari wasn't an engineer, a designer, or a famous driver. His skill was administration and making sure he had the best talent available for his racing team. The production sports car business grew out of the racing success.
I think the city of Modena finally recognized their #1 citizen in the best possible way with a monument which will be there forever.
Enzo Ferrari's early life was spent around cars because his father ran a metal and motor repair shop. Watching the famous drivers of the day, Lancia and Nazzaro race, fired young Ferrari's ambition to become a racing driver. His First World War army service was spent shoeing mules, and he was invalided out of the army due to ill health, and difficult times followed. Short of money and out of work, he joined the CMN company, driving cars in the factory, which in turn led to racing. He then moved to Alfa Romeo as a driver and became a noted performer. In 1920, he was second in the Targa Florio, and his best result was winning the Coppa Acerba at Pescara in 1924. However, his managerial skills were taking over, and by 1929, Ferrari wanted to control his own destiny. With the help of the Caniano brothers, Augusto and Alfredo, heirs to a textile fortune, he formed Scuderia Ferrari. Alfa Romeo agreed that Ferrari should run their racing team under the Scuderia Ferrari banner. The Scuderia's main task was to assist wealthy Alfa Romeo customers with their racing by providing delivery and mechanical support in a turn-up-and-drive operation. He signed professionals like Campari and Nuvolari to join the amateur drivers, and in his first year, Scuderia Ferrari could boast 50 full and part-time drivers. Everything went well until 1933, when Alfa Romeo was nationalised by the Italian government, and the works announced that it was withdrawing from motor racing. The Scuderia was a more autonomous organisation than just running the factory cars. The prancing horse on the Scuderia badge replaced the four-leaf clover quadrifolio emblem of the official Alfa Romeo team cars. The withdrawal by Alfa led to the retirement of the P3, and Ferrari had to make do with the earlier sports Monza. With opposition from Bugatti and Maserati and their new 8cm 3000, Ferrari had a much tougher time in 1933. With the Monza Alfa suffering reliability problems, Italian ace Tazio Nuvolari moved to the Maserati team during 1933. Ferrari cultivated trade support from Pirelli, Bosch and Shell. Pirelli convinced Alfa to supply Ferrari with 6 P3s and the services of engineer Luigi Bazzi and test driver Attilio Marioni. The Scuderia was now, in effect, Alfa Romeo's racing department, but during the mid-1930s they were unable to compete with the Mercedes-Benz and Auto Union onslaught. In 1937, Ferrari suggested to Alfa that they build 1.5-litre Voiturette-class cars, but what he got was Alfa Romeo's decision to bring the racing effort back in-house. The responsibility for running the works cars was taken away from Ferrari, and now was the responsibility of chief engineer Wilfried Ricard, who Ferrari didn't get on with, so he left. As part of his severance agreement, Enzo Ferrari couldn't compete against Alfa Romeo for 4 years. Ferrari started a new company called Auto Avio Costruzioni, SPA, which produced machine parts and, quietly, some racing cars. After the Second World War, Enzo Ferrari was ready to start again, building sports cars under his own name at Maranello, where the factory remains to this day. This is the oldest surviving Ferrari, a 166, chassis number 002. The cycle wings could be taken off for racing. The first success was in Rome in May 1947.
Cortese sulla nuova Ferrari 125 è scattato in testa. Barbieri su Maserati, tenace inseguitore, premiato con uno splendido secondo.
These early Ferraris were built around a Colombo-designed V12 engine in capacities from 1.5 to 2.5 litres. Enzo Ferrari realised that he was onto a winner with a considerable market for his cars. Racing was not used to sell more cars, rather cars were sold so that the team could go racing. Ferrari was not sentimental, and cars that weren't sold were scavenged for parts or scrapped. Ferrari was beginning to win major races. Clemente Biondetti won the Targa Florio, the Mille Miglia and the Tour of Sicily in 1948 and 1949. Former Scuderia Ferrari driver Luigi Chinetti lived in America and ordered 6 of these cars, which he quickly sold. Chinetti also gave Ferrari an important race win, the 1949 Le Mans 24-hour. Ferrari always had Grand Prix motor racing uppermost in his mind. In 1949, he attempted to challenge his former employers, Alfa Romeo, with the 1.5-litre supercharged car, the 125. Single-stage supercharging was tried first, and then 2-stage supercharging. The chassis was lengthened to improve the road holding. The 125 was competitive in races that Alfa Romeo didn't enter. Alberto Ascari won the International Trophy at Silverstone and the Swiss and Italian Grand Prix, while Luigi Villoresi won the Dutch Grand Prix. By 1950, Ferrari realised that a 4.5-litre unsupercharged engine was the better option. The 125s were left in the hands of private owners, notably Britain's Peter Whitehead, Brazil's Chico Lundy and France's Raymond Sommer. The new car was to be built from scratch, driven by Alberto Ascari and Luigi Villoresi. Ferrari employed Aurelio Lampredi as designer and development engineer, basing his ideas on Colombo's principles. The chassis was similar, and the 1.5-litre V12 could easily be replaced by the 4.5-litre. The 4.5 had a chain-driven single-overhead camshaft, 24-valve, 60-degree engine. The chassis was also used in Formula 2 with the old V12 engine until a new 2-litre 4-cylinder was ready. Originally, the 375 was 3.3 litres. It was increased to 4.1 and then 4.5 litres. The claimed power output was 380 brake horsepower. The 375 was slightly slower than the all-conquering Alphas, but the speed deficit could be overcome with Ferrari's lower fuel consumption and fewer pit stops. In 1950, the Grand Prix scene was revitalised by the news that Alfa Romeo had decided to make a comeback for the new World Championship with a car that Enzo Ferrari had initiated. This led to a battle royale between the two Italian marques, Alfa Romeo and newcomers Ferrari. It started with the Grand Prix d'Europe at Silverstone, the name replacing the British Grand Prix as it does whenever the name Grand Prix d'Europe is held. The Alfa Romeos in first, second, third and fourth positions on the grid. Fangio was to retire with engine trouble, leaving Farina to win from the veteran Fagioli and a delighted Reg Parnell, and the Ferraris just off the pace. At Monaco, Fangio won after avoiding a huge pile-up on the first lap, while Farina drove to victory in the Swiss Grand Prix at Bern. Fangio won at Spa and at Reims. The challenge with the big Ferraris was to start in the Italian Grand Prix. Farina won after Fangio's engine blew up. This victory ensured that Giuseppe Farina became the first world champion driver, with Fangio in second place. Ferrari continued to develop the 375, and they won the Peñarín Grand Prix at Barcelona, the final race of the year, where Alfa Romeo didn't enter. The order: Ascari, Serafini and Taruffi after Reg Parnell and Peter Walker had retired the BRMs in their Grand Prix debut. Ascari finished the season in fifth place. In 1951, Argentinian Froilan Gonzalez joined Ferrari. Fellow countryman Fangio won a rain-affected race at Bern, with Alfa Romeo test driver Consalvo Sanisi in second place and Farina third. Spa was won by Farina after Fangio was delayed by a jammed wheel spline. Ascari and Villaraci were placed second and third for Ferrari, only a short distance behind. Alfa again won at Reims. But at the British Grand Prix, it finally happened, a Ferrari beating the Alfas. To the cheers of the crowd, the portly Pampas Bull, as Gonzalez was known, took the lead, and from that moment it was Gonzalez all the way. Fangio was second, and Villaraci and another Ferrari was third. At the Nürburgring, Ascari took the battle to Alfa Romeo, and even with an unexpected stop for tyres, still won, with Fangio second and Gonzalez third. The Italian Grand Prix saw 4 Alfas lining up to meet 4 Ferraris. In a race of fluctuating fortune, the reliability of Ascari's Ferrari won the day. Gonzalez was second and Farina third. He'd been delayed by a slow Alfa pit stop and a leaking fuel tank. Fangio led Ascari by just 2 points in the World Championship as they went to the Spanish Grand Prix. The championship would be decided there. The Ferrari team decided to change their wheel size at the last moment for this race. It proved to be a great mistake, as all of their cars suffered from thrown tyre treads. It left Fangio in the lead, and he held on to win the race and the championship. Alfa Romeo now withdrew from racing, as they didn't wish to develop a new car for the Formula. 1952 saw the 4.5-litre Ferrari the only really competitive car available for Grand Prix racing, so the championship was run to Formula 2 regulations. Lampredi had designed the new 2-litre 4-cylinder unit for Formula 2, using 2 plugs per cylinder and 2 dual-throat Weber carburetors. This was installed in a Formula 2 chassis with a new de Dion rear suspension. Ascari was in complete control with his Ferrari 500 all season, helped by the fact that Fangio was injured in a serious accident during the Monza Grand Prix in his Maserati and was out of action for the rest of the year. Piero Taruffi won the first race of the year, the Swiss Grand Prix, for Ferrari, with Ascari winning the British, French, Dutch, Belgian and the Italian races, and the World Championship in the process. 1953 and the Argentinian Grand Prix counted for the championship for the first time. The Ferrari team carried on where they'd left off, Ascari winning from Villaraci and new Ferrari driver Mike Hawthorn. Ascari then went on to win the Dutch Grand Prix and the Belgian Grand Prix. At the French Grand Prix at Reims, it was a memorable race between Fangio's Maserati and Hawthorn's Ferrari. Hawthorn won by less than a second when he outthought Fangio at the last corner. Ascari led the British Grand Prix from start to finish. Fangio was second. Ascari failed to finish the German Grand Prix after a loose wheel and blowing up Villaresi's car. Farina won that race for Ferrari. The Italian Grand Prix was a repeat of Reims, with a close struggle between Ferrari and Maserati. Ascari and Farina with the Ferraris, and Fangio and Marimon in the Maseratis. On the last corner, Ascari spun. Farina was forced onto the grass, and Fangio went through to win. Alberto Ascari had sufficient points to win consecutive World Championships for Ferrari. While Ferrari was almost unbeatable in Grand Prix racing, he was having more competition in sports car racing. The Mille Miglia was a Ferrari preserve. Gianni Mazzotto won in 1950, Villaresi in 51 and Bracco in 52. And the 1953 race resulted in a narrow win for Mazzotto, who held off Fangio with the Disco Volante Alfa Romeo to win. Mazzotto was one of the drivers who specialised in this famous long-distance race. Fangio was leading at Siena, but with 160 kilometres to go, he lost steering on one wheel, which allowed Mazzotto to pass him. Meanwhile at Le Mans, Ferrari was having much more trouble. The new Jaguar team and the French Talbots were the cause of it. Talbot beat them in 1950, and Jaguar, intent upon winning the French Classic, won in 1951. When Mercedes came back, they won in 52, but Jaguar were back again to win in 1953, with Ferrari foiled again. 1954 saw the introduction of the powerful 4.9-litre V12 Ferrari, with the lead car driven by Froilan Gonzalez and Maurice Trintignant. This was taking on the streamlined Jaguar D-Type with its smaller 3.4-litre dry-sumped straight six and disc brakes. Moss outbraked himself in an effort to stay with the Ferrari. The Jaguar had the braking and the road holding, while the Ferrari had the straight-line speed. Throughout the entire race, the battle was between Jaguar and Ferrari. Sunday morning, the Rolt Hamilton D-Type was fighting it out with the Gonzalez-Trintignant Ferrari when the rain came. Sliding the car, Hamilton was in superb form. The car had been damaged in a minor accident during the night. Rolt was struggling in the final stages, wearing goggles. When the Ferrari came in for the final pit stop, the car was reluctant to start. The gap between the two was coming down. Consternation in the Ferrari pit, but Jaguar too were under pressure. Rolt was brought in and Hamilton, complete with a visor, put back behind the wheel of the car. Froilan Gonzalez set out in the Ferrari, knowing that he had to maintain a steady pace until the end of the 24 hours. That he managed to do so was a remarkable feat of control in a car that wasn't as drivable as the D-Type. Duncan Hamilton was closing up all the time. By a narrow margin, Ferrari took the 1954 Le Mans 24-hour race. Maurice Trintignant celebrates with Gonzalez, while Duncan Hamilton brings in the Jaguar D-Type to the applause of the crowd, finishing second. 1954 saw the introduction of the 2.5-litre formula for Grand Prix racing. It was created to encourage development of the unblown engine, which was more value to production car engineers than supercharged cars. There was also a general move towards chassis frames constructed of small-gauge tubes. In 1954, Lancia joined in with their new D50 cars. Here was another step forward, as the Lancia's V8 engine was used to stiffen the chassis frame and the front suspension was fitted to it. Ferrari started the season with the Tipo 625 engine squeezed into a 500 chassis. Later they fitted a 2.49 litre four-cylinder engine in the bulbous Squalo or Shark model. Fuel was carried in side tanks to assist the low polo moment of inertia. The result, however, was a difficult car to drive. Maserati raced the 250F, developed from their Formula 2 car, and this was the Maserati that became known as their greatest Grand Prix car ever. Fangio got the season off to a good start, winning the Argentinian and the Belgian Grand Prix in the 250F before Mercedes-Benz came on the scene. Mercedes made their return to Grand Prix racing in the French Grand Prix at Reims. Fangio and Kling came first and second in the W196 with its all-enveloping streamlined body. Mercedes didn't dominate the British Grand Prix, however. Their drivers couldn't see the marker barrels to keep up with Ferrari's Froilan Gonzalez. That was the second and final Grand Prix win for the Argentinian. In the German Grand Prix, Fangio won again. They had to give best to Mike Hawthorne's Ferrari in the Spanish Grand Prix, which saw the debut, however, of the Lancia driven by Ascari. Fangio won his second World Championship in 1954 and the third in 1955, a year dominated by Mercedes. In the second round of the championship at Monaco, Ascari's Lancia had briefly led prior to diving into the harbour. Ascari swam ashore, none the worse for wear, only to be killed a week later at Monza testing a sports Ferrari. Ascari's accident and the retirement of Mercedes-Benz allowed Maurice Trintignant to win the Monaco Grand Prix for Ferrari. The shock of Ascari's death, so soon after the Monaco incident, coupled with Lancia's financial difficulties, caused the company to withdraw from all forms of racing. The cars were given to Ferrari, who replaced his 625s with the Lancias, and he raced them with the assistance of Fiat and the Italian Motorsports Federation. With the withdrawal of Mercedes-Benz at the end of 1955, Fangio joined Ferrari, driving alongside Luigi Musso, Eugenio Castellotti, and a new driver, the Englishman Peter Collins. At Monaco, Moss, now leading the Maserati team, beat Fangio in a no-holds-barred contest. Fangio battered his own car into submission and took over Collins's car to finish second. Fangio won the Argentinian Grand Prix and Peter Collins the Belgian and French Grand Prix. Fangio returned to the winner's circle with victories in Britain and in Germany. Moss won the Italian Grand Prix for Maserati with Fangio second. He and Collins, by careful driving, managed to avoid trouble from inferior tyres. When Fangio's car broke its steering, Collins generously handed over his car to the team leader, gifting the World Championship to Fangio as well. The fourth World Championship to Fangio and the third to Ferrari. 1957 was to see the emergence of the British as front-runners in Grand Prix racing. Tony van der Velde's investment now paid off, and Van Wall won 3 races. Fangio was now back in a 250F Maserati, his time at Ferrari not being a happy experience despite the world title. The Argentinian claimed he wasn't getting the best cars. He won the Argentinian Grand Prix again and at Monaco after a crash which eliminated Moss, Collins and Hawthorne. Fangio triumphed at Rouen. He then went on to win the race of his life, the German Grand Prix at Nürburgring. Catching the Ferraris of Hawthorne and Collins after his Maserati had been refueled, he set lap record after lap record. 2 more second places at Monza and Pescara saw Fangio win his 5th World Championship, a record only matched 40 years later by current Ferrari driver Michael Schumacher. In 1958, the Van Wall team was ready to take on Ferrari, but Mike Hawthorne was calculating in his World Championship year in the Ferrari, winning by just a single point from Moss in the Van Wall. Ferrari introduced the famous Dino Ferrari with its V6 engine, named after Ferrari's son Dino, who had helped design it prior to his untimely death from a wasting illness. Dino name would also be used on other cars later on. The Dino 246 Ferrari, with its double overhead camshaft 2.5-litre V6, developed 280 brake horsepower on avgas, which was now compulsory because alcohol-based fuels had been banned. Ferraris were driven by Hawthorne, Collins, Musso and Von Trips, and the American Phil Hill during the season. Sterling Moss drove Rob Walker's Cooper Climax to beat the Ferrari team in the Argentinian Grand Prix, and Maurice Trintignant in the same car beat them again in Monaco. Ferraris were completely outclassed at Zandvoort, Hawthorne managing to struggle up to 5th. He protested to Ferrari, who took the comments to heart and produced a car that won pole position in the next Grand Prix at Spa. Collins led, but was an early retirement. Tony Brooks took the lead in his van wall, leaving Hawthorne to finish second. Hawthorne went on to win the French Grand Prix at Reims, which he dominated from the start. Unfortunately, Luigi Musso crashed his Ferrari and died from his injuries. At Silverstone in the British Grand Prix, Peter Collins pulled away from everyone at the start and won with ease, with Hawthorne in second place after Moss had retired. The German Grand Prix proved another disaster for Ferrari. Hawthorne and Collins were firmly in the lead. Tony Brooks, however, with a diminishing fuel load, caught and passed them. Trying to stay with the van wall, Peter Collins left the road and crashed, and he was fatally injured. Phil Hill recalls the tense atmosphere in the Ferrari team in 1958.
Ferrari needed people that were so devoted and so needy that they would be willing to go through any kind of discomforts and miseries to just be there on the spot, ready to jump in to test a car at the Modena Autodrome or something like that. And Peter had shown that he didn't want to do that anymore. Yeah, it wasn't quite the same, that's all. It was different. And then Peter, of course, did that year that he was killed. There were a number of unhappy circumstances. You remember the scene about one of them being so indiscreet as to say that they purposely flipped the clutch at Le Mans in '58. You remember that? And that they'd be on the next train, they'd be on the boat train at 10:40 or something like that, and somebody heard it and told Tavoni, and it just turned into a terrible thing. In fact, Peter was penalized for that, by being made to drive a Formula 2 car somewhere or something like that. Am I remembering it right?
Brooks then won the Italian Grand Prix, Moss the Portuguese Grand Prix, while Hawthorne had a string of second places to keep him in contention. At Casablanca, Moss won again, but Hawthorne finished second and won the championship for Ferrari. He retired, but tragically was killed in early 1959. Ferrari had lost 3 drivers in less than a year. 1959 was a year of change. Van Wall retired from racing and the lightweight Coopers were a match for the Ferraris. The 1959 World Championship was won by Jack Brabham. Tony Brooks drove for Ferrari and made a fight of it, winning the French and German Grand Prix and finishing 3rd in the championship. In 1960, the Dino Ferrari was even more outclassed. A poorly supported Italian Grand Prix was won by Phil Hill, the team's only victory that year, and the last by a front-engine Grand Prix car. In sports car racing in the 50s, Ferrari was much more successful. Castellotti won the rain-affected Mille Miglia in 1956. Taruffi took a popular victory in 1957, but the unfortunate Alfonso de Portago had a tyre burst on his Ferrari and crashed into the crowd, killing himself, his co-driver and a number of spectators. It was the end of the Mille Miglia. In 1958, Ferrari introduced the new 3-litre V12 Testarossa sports car, so named for the red cam covers used on the passion-inspiring gem of an engine. It was to win Le Mans and the World Sports Car Championship. Ferrari were well beaten by Aston Martin in 1959, only to bounce back in 1960. Their rivals were the Tipo 61 birdcage Maserati in the hands of the inexperienced Camerati team and the increasingly determined presence of Porsche. 1960 was not a great year for sports car racing. Ferrari won by having a power advantage, being more reliable and more experienced. The first rear-engined sports Ferraris were produced in 1961 and owed much to their Formula One contemporaries. The 246 had a divided nose and a transverse spoiler. Its only 1961 success was the Targa Florio. The trusty old Testarossas were to triumph at Le Mans. The rear-engine revolution at Ferrari introduced many different models, beginning with the 250p. Ferrari won Le Mans every year from 1960 to 1965, and these 6 victories firmly established Ferrari as the sports car company. Ferrari also dominated the new GT category for road-going sports cars. Firstly, the GT 250, driven to numerous victories by Stirling Moss. One of the most evocative Ferrari designs, the GTO, followed. These cars, the most sought after and valuable of all Ferraris, were immensely successful. The GTO was followed by the GTO 275. Although the 1960 Grand Prix season was not a great success for Ferrari, they developed a new car for the start of the 1.5-litre Formula, which started in 1961. The 156 was a conventional space frame with wishbone coil spring independent suspension at the front and rear. It was identified by the famous shark nose. First introduced was a 65-degree V6 developing 180 brake horsepower. Later, a wide-angle 120-degree V6 developed 190. The only real threat to Ferrari was Stirling Moss in Rob Walker's Lotus and the underpowered 4-cylinder Coventry Climax engine. Moss beat the team comprehensively at the Nürburgring and at Monaco, finishing narrowly ahead of Ginther's Ferrari. Giancarlo Baghetti won his first 3 races in a Ferrari, entered to help young Italian drivers. Syracuse, Naples and the French Grand Prix fell to the only person ever to win a Grand Prix at the first attempt. The 1961 championship was a straight fight between Ferrari drivers Wolfgang von Trips of Germany and the talented American Phil Hill. Von Trips won at Zandvoort and Aintree. Hill won the Belgian Grand Prix and finished second at Aintree and the Nürburgring. Victory in the Italian Grand Prix ensured he became the first American to win the World Championship. Unfortunately, von Trips had collided with Jim Clark in a Lotus and crashed, killing 14 people. The death of his friend, rival and teammate took the edge off Phil Hill's triumph. Ferrari's fortunes have a habit of falling from the pinnacle of success one year to the depths of despair the next. And this happened in 1962. The team didn't win a Grand Prix during the year. The cars were revised, but they were outperformed by the new British V8s. Many of Ferrari's senior staff, including Phil Hill, Kitty and Tavoni, left during the closed season to join ATS. Joining Ferrari was John Surtees.
And gradually we tested and we put together the Formula One V6 car and the V12 engined sports cars. And I went out and we won our first sports car race, which was very nice, at Sebring, and Nürburgring, the 1,000 kilometres. And the Formula One car worked quite well. It was down on overall performance on the Climax engines, but we worked hard and I was able to win my first Grand Prix that year at Nürburgring, where the help of a strong car and a usable car and the Nürburgring, the old circuit, it all sort of equaled things up and I was able to win. But Ferrari in those days, of course, was its own worst enemy because it was terribly political as a company and it also had to balance the sports car racing program against the Formula One program. And so you never had a full year of effort take place into a particular formula.
In 1964, Surtees was joined by Lorenzo Bandini. They were competitive throughout the season using V6 and V8 engined cars. Surtees won the German and Italian Grand Prix, and Bandini won in Austria. Surtees went to the last Grand Prix in Mexico with a real chance of winning the World Championship, as did rivals Jim Clark and Graham Hill. Clark led the race, only to retire near the end. Hill was involved in a battle with Surtees' teammate for second place. In a controversial race, Bandini collided with Hill, who pitted with a damaged exhaust. This left Surtees to finish second and become the only man to win the World Championship on 2 wheels and 4, both with Italian teams. A decline in Ferrari fortunes followed in 1965. Ferrari could have wiped the board in 1966, the first year of the new 3-litre formula. After Surtees won the Belgian Grand Prix, the team was riven with dispute. Surtees and Enzo Ferrari versus Dragoni and the English test driver engineer, Mike Parks. Apart from Scarfiotti's surprise win in the Italian Grand Prix, the Ferrari team went into the doldrums until 1970. In sports car racing, Ferrari suffered at the hands of Carroll Shelby's Ford GT project, which trounced his cars at Le Mans in 1966 and 67. Shelby recalls how Ford's involvement began.
Henry Ford telling them that he wanted to win Le Mans. And when Henry Ford passed that word around at Ford, it was God talking. And they panicked. They went over and tried to buy Ferrari, and in a typical manner that the bureaucracy of a large corporation goes over and tries to bowl over a little guy, they found out they were dealing with a tough old son of a bitch that they weren't going to push around. So he told them to buzz off.
Enzo Ferrari withdrew from sports car racing in 1968. A tentative return was made with a 3-litre V12 312P in 1969. But the team suffered at the hands of Porsche, who were improving every year. Derek Bell remembers Enzo Ferrari.
It's strange, when I was with Ferrari, he was incredible. At that point, my wife at that time, she was very, very ill, and he was always very, very concerned about her health. And every day I'd go to the factory and he'd say, "How's your wife? Let's phone up the hospital, see how she is," that sort of thing. And he never ever put pressure on me. I mean, he used to say to me, "You know, we've got you a new car for this week, let's see how you go," and I'd always go quite well. But of course,
the 312 PB was introduced using the 3-litre flat 12 derived from the Formula One program. It could be described as a Formula One car with a full-width body. Detuned for long-distance events, the factory made a big effort and prepared the cars properly. The result was the 1972 cars, which comprehensively won the World Championship. Redman was a noted sports car driver, but had a limited Formula One career. He explains why.
They were really terrific, and in fact I drove for Ferrari for 2 years and for Porsche for 2 years, so but somehow those 69 and 70 in the Porsche, which was the first time they'd won the World Championship, somehow seemed a bigger thing than when I drove for Ferrari, who also won the World Championship in 1972, and then I drove again in 73. And in both cases the teams were terrific, and we had none of the famous Ferrari histrionics, the throwing and the yelling. We didn't have any of that. The team was run by the Swiss, Peter Shetty. It was superbly run. And I only met Enzo Ferrari once. I went to Maranello and I was invited to lunch, and he only spoke 2 words to me. You know what he said? He got hold of my cheek and he went, "Nice boy." That was it.
You nearly drove Grand Prix cars for Ferrari because you had a Formula 2 drive, then you had an accident which rather spoiled it all.
Well, it wasn't that. I was invited to drive the Formula 2 car, and I went to test it at Modena, and engineer Fangio was in charge of the test, and partway through, about lunchtime, he pointed across to the trees and he said, "Brian, you see over there?" And there was this rain-coated figure. He says, "It's Signa Ferrari," you know, to make me go faster. So I tried a bit harder, and they asked if I'd drive the car at the Nürburgring. on the Sudschleif, which is still a very difficult track, uphill and downdale, and about 4 miles around instead of 8 miles around. And in practice I did fine, I was fine, the car was nice, I liked it, and I came in 10 minutes from the end of qualifying, and Fangio said to me, "Why you come in?" I said, "I've gone as fast as I can." He said, "Go out and try harder." So I went and drove like a maniac. He said, "You're in 10th place." And I went a tenth of a second faster, and I'd been in 4th place all along. So I was pretty unimpressed with this. And so in the race, I was lying 4th in a tight bunch. Jackie Hicks, the team leader in the Ferrari, was 1st. Piers Courage was 2nd in the Brabham. And Kurt Ahrens, the German, was 3rd, and I was just behind Kurt. We came past the start and finish line on the 4th lap, and I got a stone through my goggle here. And I thought it had hit me in the eye, and I braked, flung my hand up, flung my goggles off, and I was like this. And then I went round the track, another 4 miles at very slow speed, came into the pits, Fangio said, Brian, what to stop? I said, And he went, "It's okay, wear your spare goggles." I said, "I don't have any." And he flung me Ix's spare goggles, which were dark green. And I drove like a madman, and I set a new record lap and finished 4th in the race. And when I got back into the hotel room, I sat on the bed and I just went, "I'm going to get killed," I thought. So that night in dinner, Fangio went and he came back. He said, "Brian, I speak with Signor Ferrari, and for the rest of the year you drive a Formula 2, and at the end of the year, Formula Uno." And I said, "No." I said, "If I drive for Ferrari, I'll be dead by the end of the year."
The 1973 season was hard fought against the fast and much improved V12 Matras. Ferrari lost the championship to Matra by 124 points to 115. Ferrari decided to withdraw from sports car racing and concentrate on Formula 1. In 1970, Fiat, which had had a financial stake in Ferrari since 1956, applied pressure, which led to the much-needed financial support. Ferrari's chief engineer, Mario Foggieri, had made extensive modifications to the new 312B flat 12 engine. The early part of the season was dominated by Jochen Rindt and Jack Brabham, while Ferrari sorted out its lubrication problems. Once this was done, the 312B was the car to beat for the rest of the season. Jackie Hicks won the Austrian, Canadian and Mexican Grand Prix. Following Jochen Rindt's death in practice, Swiss driver Clay Regazzoni won the Italian Grand Prix. Jackie Hicks finished second to Rindt in the 1970 World Championship. He'd finished second the year before with Brabham, but 1970 was his best year. By this stage, Enzo Ferrari didn't go to race meetings, but usually appeared at Monza during practice. On race day, information was sent to him by team managers. 1971 and 72 were not so successful, although Mario Andretti won the South African Grand Prix at Kyalami in 1971. Jackie Hicks won the Dutch in 71 and the German Grand Prix in 1972. By 1973, Ferrari were in a trough, a very poor year with no victories as Jackie Stewart led the field to his final World Championship. 1974 saw Ferrari emerging once again. The performance of the 312B3s were more impressive. Austrian Niki Lauda had joined the team. He went on to win the Spanish and the Dutch Grand Prix, while Regazzoni won the German. Ferrari's potential was shown in 1975. Lauda took the championship away from the Ford Cosworth cars for the first time since 1968. The introduction of the 312T marked the beginning of a long run of success for the Maranello concern. Lauda had applied all his single-minded determination and cool analytical approach to motor racing. He dominated the 1975 season, winning 5 Grand Prix, while teammate Regazzoni won 2. He carried on the same way in the early part of 1976, winning 6 further Grand Prix, all the way until the German Grand Prix at the Nürburgring. Lauda, trying to catch up with the leaders, crashed in flames and was given the last rites. His life hung in the balance and his future looked bleak, but he was to return a biblical 40 days later at Monza. Ferrari withdrew from racing, but it was for a short time only. With typical aplomb, Ferrari spoiled it for him by employing the Argentinian driver Carlos Reutemann. The fight was on following the Italian Grand Prix, with James Hunt for the World Championship right till the last race in Japan. Lauda had to withdraw in terribly wet conditions with problems with his eyelids, which had been burned at the Nürburgring. 1977 didn't see a repeat of the drama of the previous year. Nevertheless, it was a seesaw season. 8 drivers won Grand Prix. Lauda, now back on form however, won 3 of them. He came second in 6 and won the Driver and Constructors' Championship for Ferrari with his consistency. In 1978, a new Ferrari driver, Gilles Villeneuve, showed tremendous talent, winning his home race, the Canadian Grand Prix. Enzo Ferrari signed the South African Jody Scheckter to join the promising Villeneuve for the 1979 season, which proved to be the greatest success. Scheckter won 3 Grand Prix, Villeneuve 4, and the season was Ferrari's, with Scheckter winning the championship and Villeneuve second. How did Scheckter remember his car?
Pretty horrible car, and when I got there, I drove this car for two races, and it was terrible. And then we got the T4, which was really nice. Yeah, the last time I drove, it was strange because it felt like I hadn't been out of the car for more than a long weekend when I got back, and then for days or maybe a week after that, I kept on waking up in the morning thinking, well, what, I have to adjust that, I have to do that to make it go faster. And it was quite strange, and then it sort of wore off.
Ferrari upheld Italian honour in Grand Prix racing, winning the World Manufacturers' Championship in 1982 and 83, still firmly guided by Enzo Ferrari. And what of Ferrari, the man? In his later years, Enzo was surrounded by close confidants, but was lonely and isolated, grieving for the son who didn't live to take up the torch. At the same time, however, he could be very straightforward. His idea of a pleasant Sunday lunch was a British-style roast and a glass of his favourite whiskey in front of the television to watch motor racing. And what about that, you might say? It happens in thousands of homes. Well, in Enzo Ferrari's case, 2 of the cars were his. They had been for almost 40 years, and they were painted in Italian racing red. Enzo Ferrari's health had been slowly declining for a number of years. And finally, in 1988, the man, a real legend in his own lifetime, passed away aged 90.
I was lucky enough to work with him for 4 years, very successful here in the 70s. And I'm sure that from the sky, at the moment today, he's very pleased of his factory, because Ferrari is living a very good moment in the road cars activity, and Ferrari is back again at the best level in Formula 1 too.
Through the 1990s, there was a relentless improvement in Ferrari's fortunes both on and off the track. Exotic road cars continued to attract gasps at motor shows with performance, style and passion unmatched by any other manufacturer. On track, Alain Prost came close to winning the world title, but it took the strong management of Luca de Montezemolo, the acumen of Jean Todt, the design skills of Rory Byrne, the tactics of Ross Brawn, the engine building of Paolo Martinelli, and most importantly, the focus of all these talents, Michael Schumacher, to lift the team to its highest level. The passing of Fiat scion Gianni Agnelli, who looked on Ferrari as the jewel in the Fiat empire, may mean a new era. Fiat may sell Ferrari into public ownership, helping to raise cash for the beleaguered parent company. Ferrari has avoided becoming just part of the Fiat empire. Because Ferrari's cars were identified with the one man more than any of the other sporting car builders, there's the feeling of entering a private or family club. Whatever happens, Ferrari's reputation and place in racing and sports car history remains unchallenged.